The Widow, episode 22. A year after the death of her beloved husband, Beatrice the widow lies surrounded by shadows and ice. Her heart, once a volcano of passion, is now a frozen desert. But then Ricardo appears, a man as charming and mysterious as the night. His smile breaks the ice shield that Beatrice has built around her wounded heart. Will Ricardo manage to melt the snow covering Beatrice's dormant love? Or will a dark secret from the past, involving her deceased husband's jealous brother, destroy everything before love can bloom? The shadow of vengeance hangs over them, and a mortal danger approaches, threatening to steal Beatrice's newfound happiness. It was a dark night, the kind where even the stars hide behind heavy, menacing clouds. The pale, frightened moon could barely illuminate the imposing mansion where Beatrice, the widow, lived enveloped in her sorrow. It had been a year since her beloved husband, Daniel, had passed away, leaving an immense void in her heart. Beatrice, once radiant and full of life, had transformed into an ice statue, every corner of her soul covered by a thick layer of snow. Her dark clothes seemed to reflect the darkness that inhabited her interior. She closed herself off more and more, building high, impenetrable walls to protect her wounded heart. The memory of Daniel's smile, a smile that once illuminated her world, was now just a knife that lacerated her from within. But fate, that stubborn joker, had other cards up its sleeve. Ricardo, a man with dark eyes as deep as a bottomless well, appeared in her life like a ray of sunshine in the midst of a storm. He was the antithesis of everything Beatrice had become, warm, kind, with a smile that carried the promise of a new dawn. His penetrating gaze, full of admiration, seemed to break the ice shield she had erected around her heart. At first, Beatrice repelled him. The memory of Daniel was too strong. It was like trying to warm an ice cube with a match, almost impossible. Ricardo, however, was persistent. He observed her, understood her pain, respected her grief. He didn't force anything, didn't try to rush the process. Gradually, with his patient kindness, he began to melt the snow that froze Beatrice's heart. Small gestures, gentle words, affectionate glances. Ricardo planted small flowers of hope in the desolate garden of her soul. He was like spring, full of life and promises of better days, trying to banish the winter that had taken over Beatrice's life. But not everything was peace and serenity. A danger approached, like a sinister shadow circling Beatrice's newfound happiness. Daniel's brother, Eduardo, always in love with Beatrice, harbored a silent and profound hatred for Ricardo. He couldn't accept that someone else could take his brother's place in the heart of the woman he loved. Vengeance inflamed his gaze. Love didn't touch him. Greed consumed him. Eduardo watched the growing closeness between Beatrice and Ricardo with a mixture of rage and frustration. His clenched fists reflected the whirlwind of negative emotions. The idea of losing her to someone else, especially to a newcomer who seemed to have won Beatrice's trust so easily, was unbearable. He devised a malevolent plan, a game of shadows that threatened to plunge Beatrice back into the abyss of her pain. A cold and calculated revenge, woven in silence, with the help of old friends. Friends of Daniel's who fueled his hatred and nurtured his dark desires. That dark night, while Beatrice and Ricardo shared a tender moment in their garden, a shadowy figure hid among the trees, watching them with furious eyes. Eduardo, armed with a diabolical plan, waited for the right moment to strike. He knew he couldn't fight against Ricardo and Beatrice's love openly, so he would use the most dangerous weapons he knew, lies and manipulation. Beatrice's story, her wounded heart, would be his main weapon. He would tell secrets from the past, lies that would make Beatrice question everything. That would undermine the trust that had begun to blossom between her and Ricardo. The shadow of betrayal and mistrust began to loom over the fragile rebirth of Beatrice's love. The snow that Ricardo was so hard at work melting could, at any moment, turn into a deadly avalanche, bearing the hope of a new love forever. It was a dark night, the kind that sends a shiver down your spine even without wind. Beatrice's mansion seemed to whisper dark secrets, the shadows dancing on the walls like restless ghosts. It had been a year since Daniel, the love of Beatrice's life, had passed away, leaving a void so large that it seemed to echo in every room of the house. Beatrice, once a vibrant flower, was now a garden covered in snow, each petal of her heart frozen by grief. The memories of Daniel were like sharp knives, cutting her soul every moment. But then Ricardo arrived like a ray of sunshine breaking through the dense clouds. He was the opposite of everything Beatrice had become, warm, kind, with a smile that brought the hope of a new beginning. Ricardo's gaze was a calm and deep river, slowly melting the ice that covered Beatrice's heart. It was as if he had a magic wand, capable of transforming eternal winter into a radiant spring. With each meeting, each touch, Beatrice's smile timidly returned, like a flower sprouting in the middle of the snow. Ricardo didn't rush things. He knew that Beatrice's heart needed time to heal. He treated her with affection, respect, and patience, building a bridge of trust over the abyss of her sadness. Small details, gestures of affection, each one was a silent message of love and care, capable of melting even the most resistant heart of ice. It was as if he were planting flowers of hope in a snow-covered garden, hoping that one day the flowers would bloom strongly. But Beatrice's happiness was threatened. A dark shadow loomed over her new love. Eduardo, Daniel's brother, always in love with Beatrice, watched her with eyes full of hatred. The idea of Beatrice with another man drove Eduardo mad, fueling a fire of vengeance in his heart. He couldn't accept that someone could steal his brother's place in Beatrice's life. It was a sickly obsession, a distorted love that consumed him from within. Eduardo wasn't a man of direct actions. He was like a venomous snake, sneaky and treacherous. He planned his revenge meticulously, like an architect plans an imposing building. Each day he wove his web of lies, seeking information, cultivating distrust. He used the people around him, people who knew Beatrice and Daniel, friends from the past, transforming them into pawns in his cruel game. While Beatrice and Ricardo were alone in a tender moment under the moonlight, Eduardo watched them from afar, his eyes gleaming with rage. He had a plan, a perverse plan to separate the two lovers, a plan that used Beatrice's greatest vulnerability, her pain, her past, and her insecurity. He would undermine Beatrice's trust in Ricardo, planting seeds of doubt and mistrust in her heart. Eduardo knew he couldn't confront Ricardo directly. He would use Beatrice's sadness as a weapon. He waited for the right moment, the moment when Beatrice's happiness was at its peak. To then, like a mortal blow, unearth secrets from the past, spread lies that would corrode the newly born love. It was a cruel plan, a cowardly revenge that could forever destroy Beatrice's happiness. The snow that Ricardo was melting could turn into an avalanche, burying hope forever in her heart. The danger was real, and the shadow of revenge was approaching, ready to steal Beatrice's love again. It was a starless night, the kind that weighs on your chest. Beatrice's old mansion, a dark silhouette against the heavy sky, seemed to hold secrets in every crack of its windows. A year ago, Daniel, the great love of Beatrice's life, had passed away, leaving a deep void, a frozen desert where a lush garden once bloomed. Beatrice, once radiant, had become an ice statue, every corner of her soul covered by a thick layer of snow. Daniel's smile, once a sun in her world, was now a knife that lacerated her. But Ricardo, like a ray of sunshine in the midst of the storm, had appeared. His dark, deep eyes seemed to penetrate the ice that imprisoned Beatrice's heart. He was warmth, kindness, a smile that promised a new dawn. Slowly, patiently, like spring imposing itself on winter, he melted the snow around Beatrice's wounded heart. Subtle gestures, affectionate words, admiring glances, small flakes of hope in a desolate garden. But a shadow loomed over this nascent happiness. Eduardo, Daniel's brother, consumed by a sickly and vengeful love for Beatrice. The sight of the two together drove him mad, fueling a silent hatred, a thirst for revenge that grew with each smile shared by Beatrice and Ricardo. Eduardo couldn't compete with Ricardo's pure love. He needed to use other weapons, dirtier, more effective. That night, while Beatrice and Ricardo surrendered to the sweetness of an intimate moment in the garden, Eduardo watched them from the shadows. His heart boiled with rage, a volcano about to erupt. He had a plan, a carefully woven web of lies, waiting for the exact moment to strike. Eduardo knew he couldn't confront them directly. He would use Beatrice's vulnerability, her pain, her memories as deadly weapons. With the help of old friends of Daniel's, silent accomplices in his revenge, Eduardo began to spread his web of lies. Dark secrets from Daniel's past, distorted and exaggerated, were whispered in Beatrice's ears. Cruel doubts, masterfully insinuated, began to corrode the trust that had been so painstakingly built. Ricardo, initially a mysterious man, an enigma now, under the distorted light of Eduardo's lies, became a potential danger. Beatrice, weakened, felt the old pain return, the snow beginning to accumulate again in her heart. Eduardo's lies hit their target, doubt. She began to question Ricardo's affectionate gestures, to interpret his glances as concealing something dark. Ricardo's gentle words, once balm for her soul, now seemed empty, full of unrevealed secrets. The trust, so carefully built, cracked like a thin layer of ice under the weight of lies. The sight of Ricardo, once a beacon in her darkness, now became ambiguous, shadowy. Beatrice's newfound happiness was threatened, about to be swept away by an avalanche of distrust and pain. The snow that Ricardo had begun to melt threatened to engulf her again. In the garden, under the dark and menacing sky, Beatrice's love trembled on the brink of the abyss. Eduardo, hidden in the darkness, watched with a sinister smile, feeling the satisfaction of revenge approaching. The battle for Beatrice's heart reached its climax. A confrontation between love and hate, truth and lies. In a clash that will decide the fate of the widow, it was a dark night, the kind that sends a shiver down your spine. The Beatrice's mansion, imposing and solitary, seemed to whisper secrets. A year ago, Daniel, the love of her life, had passed away, leaving an immense void, a frozen desert in place of a flowered garden. Beatrice, once radiant, was now an ice statue, her heart protected by a wall of pain. The memories of Daniel, sweet and bitter at the same time, were like sharp knives, cutting her soul. But Ricardo, like a ray of sunshine in the midst of a storm, had arrived. His dark, deep eyes seemed to melt the ice that imprisoned Beatrice's heart. He was the opposite of her sadness, warm, kind, with a smile that promised a new dawn. Slowly, patiently, he built a bridge of trust over the abyss of her pain. And Beatrice, little by little, felt the snow melting in her heart, small flowers of hope sprouting in the desolate garden. But their happiness was threatened by a sinister shadow, Eduardo, Daniel's brother. Consumed by a sickly love and an insatiable thirst for revenge, he saw Beatrice and Ricardo as an insult, an affront to his brother's memory. Eduardo couldn't compete with Ricardo's sincere love. So, he resorted to the most perverse weapons, lies and manipulation. That night, while Beatrice and Ricardo surrendered to the sweet taste of an intimate moment under the stars, Eduardo watched from the shadows. His eyes gleamed with fury. He had a diabolical plan, a carefully woven web of lies to destroy their love. With the help of old friends of Daniel's, silent accomplices in his revenge, he began to weave his web of destruction. Secrets from Daniel's past, distorted and exaggerated, were whispered in Beatrice's ears. Insidious doubts, masterfully planted, began to corrode the trust that had been so painstakingly built. Ricardo, the mysterious man, came to be seen as a danger, a threat to Beatrice's peace. Their happiness began to crumble like a house of cards. The trust, the balm that healed Beatrice's wounds, was being replaced by mistrust. Beatrice, vulnerable, felt the old pain return. Eduardo's lies were like a corrosive poison that destroyed everything in its path. Ricardo's affectionate words, once a balm, now sounded empty, full of unrevealed secrets. Doubt, that treacherous serpent, slithered between them, undermining the relationship that had cost so much to bloom. She began to question Ricardo's gaze, his gentle smile. The security of her soul began to crumble, transformed into dust by the poison of distrust. The snow, which Ricardo was so hard at work melting, began to accumulate again, threatening to bury her again in the darkness of her pain. Their love, so fragile, trembled on the brink of the abyss. In the garden, under the darkness of the night, happiness was threatened on the brink of the abyss. Eduardo, hidden in the shadows, watched everything with a cruel and victorious smile on his lips. He had achieved what he wanted, to plant the seed of doubt in the widow's heart. And then, in a moment of maximum tension, when Beatrice was about to succumb to the distrust that corroded her soul, a figure emerges from the shadows. It is Ricardo, who heard everything Eduardo had said to Beatrice, and arrives carrying the most shocking revelation. Eduardo is not only behind the lies, but he is also responsible for Daniel's death. Eduardo had killed his own brother. The widow, shocked, can't believe her ears. Will she find the strength to fight against the brutal truth that has just been revealed? After all, how will Beatrice react to this new and terrible information? And Ricardo, now how will he protect his beloved from this mortal threat, which is so close, so intimate? What will happen to Beatrice? What will happen to Ricardo? What will Eduardo do now that his secret has been revealed? The fate of Beatrice and the future of her new love hangs by a thread.